I'd now like to introduce a fellow National Officer of Stop the War Coalition, journalist and key player in the Free Assange campaign, John Rees.
Thanks, Shelley, and my thanks to Mike Rosen for kicking off the discussion in such an exemplary way, because I do believe that a year in, more than a year in, to Israel's assault on Gaza, we are faced with a very different and more complex situation than many of us could possibly have predicted. Israel is now not just at war in Gaza, it's at war in the West Bank, it's at war in Lebanon, in Syria, in Yemen, and with Iran. It is indeed engaged in a regional war, and many of the explanations which served as perfectly effective a year ago will not explain this whole situation. I think Mike is absolutely right to raise the question of how we develop our thinking to be able to keep pace with the scale of events. And I agree with a number of points that he makes. I think, first of all, it's absolutely essential that we are clear, as Mike was saying, that the Israeli state performs an absolutely vital function. Indeed, its very existence is dependent on performing a vital function for US and Western imperialism. You couldn't have any clearer statement of this than the statement that Joe Biden made, when he said that Israel is the best $3 billion a year that the US ever spends. If Israel did not exist, the US would have to invent it. And I believe that that is a very clear statement from the horse's mouth, even if it's a retiring and knackered horse, about the situation that exists between the United States and Israel. And I think that's very important because there are other explanations, as Mike has indicated, which aren't as complete as that. You see, with that explanation, it's very clear why Israel would be engaged in a regional war, because Israel isn't paid $3 billion a year by the United States simply to keep down the Palestinians. It must, of course, keep down the Palestinians, but its real function is to police the entirety of the Arab world. That's the job that is worth paying $3 billion a year for. Now, there is a lot of very common definitions about what Israel is doing that don't highlight that absolutely vital aspect. For instance, the oft-heard description that the relationship between Israel and the Palestinians is a settler colonial relationship is true enough as applied to the relationship between the Israeli state and the Palestinians, but it doesn't capture the full weight of the fact that what Israel is there for is to police the entirety of the Middle East. There's another very widespread view that the Americans do this because of the Zionist lobby. But that is not an accurate description of what happens. Not because the Zionist lobby doesn't exist. It does exist, not because it doesn't have some effect. It does have some effect, but it is not the cause of the United States backing for Israel. The United States isn't lobbied in to supporting Israel. It supports Israel because it wants to, because it needs to, because it is politically effective for it to do so. It doesn't have to be lobbied into doing that. Being a Zionist lobbyist is the easiest job in the world. Lobbyists are often trying to convince governments. If you're a climate lobbyist, you're trying to persuade the government to do something it doesn't want to do. But a Zionist lobbyist is convincing the United States to do exactly what it wants to do. And so I think these are important dimensions of it. I'd like to add one thing, which is that this is one very, very important, and because of the events of the last year, predominant in our minds aspect of the way in which the United States and its Western allies keep order in the Middle East. But the imperial order in the Middle East is an arch, and only one side of the arch is support for the state of Israel. The other side of the arch is support for the Arab dictatorships and kingdoms in the Middle East. It is true that Israel is the single biggest recipient of US military aid in the world. But the second biggest recipient of US military aid in the world is the al-Sisi dictatorship in Egypt. And the architecture of the Middle East is this. The Israelis are paid to keep the Arabs as a whole down, and the Arab dictatorships are paid not to attack Israel. And both sides of that relationship are absolutely essential. This is what the Abraham Accords, the baby of Donald Trump, was about. It was a personification, if you like, a crystallization of US policy. It was an agreement that Saudi would recognize Israel and that Israel would enter into an alliance with Saudi. It was precisely that business. Now, the events of the last year have massively destabilized that prospect. They've thrown the continued resistance of the Palestinians and the resistance of Lebanese and the resistance of Yemenis has blown up that ruling order. And it is not settled yet. It is not settled yet what the ruling order that comes out of this will look like. And that is more uncertain now than it was simply when Israel was attacking Gaza, because it is engaged in a regional war. A regional war which is not always winning. It's not clear that it's winning in Lebanon. It is certainly not clear that it is winning against the Houthis in Yemen, who have absolutely hemorrhaged the trade that's going through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. And it is not clear what the outcome of a wider conflict with Iran, the most powerful potential hegemon in the Middle East to rival the United States, not clear what the outcome of that would be. And really, my only caveat to what Mike has said is, it is about the idea that the military industrial complex likes perpetual wars. I don't think they do. I think it matters to states. You know, Julian Assange made the same point. He said the goal isn't to win a war, the goal is perpetual war. But actually that's not true. It really matters to states whether or not they win wars. It mattered to the Americans whether or not they won or lost in Vietnam. It mattered whether they won or lost in Afghanistan. It mattered whether they won or lost in Iraq. The truth of the matter is the military-industrial complex will sell arms whether the countries are at war or at peace. It will modernize weaponry, it will introduce new technology, it will continue to sell in a Cold War or a hot war. But in a hot war, you need to win. In a hot war, you cannot be defeated. Otherwise, imperial power begins to ebb away. Rivals begin to emerge, and this is the point. We live in a competitive state system, and in a competitive state system, outcomes are not determined even by the most powerful states. And upsets can happen, and even the watchdog can get off the leash and bite the neighbours, and unpredictable events can begin to drive consequences which none of the major powers can foresee. And that is the prospect that we should hold on to. The resistance of the Palestinians has held up and disrupted imperial power, has disrupted the plans of imperial power in the Middle East. That game is still in play. We are part of it. And what we should renew at this juncture is our determination to make sure that we do the most possible damage to the British government and its allies.